If you're driving professionally, it's essential that you be aware of the weather patterns in the areas that you're going to be traveling. Bad weather can cause anything from inconvenience and delays to major accidents, interstate shutdowns, and in some cases death if four-wheelers get involved with the trucks on bad roads. For me, personally, the worst is freezing rain. And I specifically have a gauge in my truck to monitor outside temperature at all times, so I can see when the temperatures are dropping and when that rain may turn to ice. Freezing rain for me is the worst thing to try to drive in because you lose all control. So if you see it starting to form on your mirrors or your gauge is telling you the temperature's dropping, get off the road right away. Don't wait. Find a safe place to get off and go park somewhere and wait for the Sanders. Strong winds. If you've ever traveled across I-80 in Wyoming and you get those big crosswinds and you're light in the trailer, I've seen trailers blow over on I-80. I'm sure you have too. Bad winter storms across I-80. Even things like dust storms on I-10 in Arizona, and I've been in one of those, and that's pretty interesting stuff. You've got to be aware of what's coming at you. If you're in the mountains and the forecast is heavy snow, got to make sure you've either got a place to land or you've got tire chains or both, one of the two. And you want to make sure that you've got extra food and extra clothing in case you're stuck on the side of the road for a day or so while they close it, plow it off, and then reopen it again. Hailstorms. I had a friend that went through a hailstorm and did tens of thousands of dollars damage to his truck just in the bodywork. The hailstones were the size of golf balls. They just destroyed his new Peterbilt. It looked awful when he came out of there. One of the worst weather experiences I ever had was riding out a fairly small tornado in Nebraska. And I hadn't been monitoring the weather, and I knew there was a tornado in the area, but when I left Grand Island that morning, I was west on I-80. When I left Grand Island that morning, they hadn't expected it to mount to much. And I got the other side of North Platte, I believe it was, and you could see this thing coming across the fields. But I was aware of it. I was ready for it, and I got underneath an overpass in anticipation, just in case it came my way. And as the storm got closer, as the tornado got closer, other cars, four-wheelers and stuff, started to cluster in underneath the overpass with me as well to try to protect themselves. And this wasn't supposed to be any major tornado at all. But by God, when that thing passed through there, you could see the winds tugging at the four-wheelers at the edges of the overpass, trying to suck them out onto the road. Any wind that can move around a 4,000-pound car is something to be reckoned with. And it was an eye-opener for me, and I realized that, and this was just a small one. And I realized at that point the potential of these things, these big tornadoes that travel through, you can't even imagine. So the lesson here is be prepared and check the weather before you take off in the morning, so you're not surprised by it, so you're prepared for it. So you've got everything you need to ride out the storm if it does hit you. Make sure your fuel tanks are full, make sure you've got some extra food on board, and if it looks like it's going to be a bad one, you might be better to ride it out where you're parked and let it go through rather than getting caught in the thing and then trying to look for a place to land. So in a situation like this, sometimes you're better just to hunker down and stay put and let it ride through. Yeah, your dispatcher's going to be unhappy, but when are they happy characters anyway? Safety is the issue here, and it's your call. It's not the dispatcher's call, it's your call, because safety is riding on the decision that you make, and it could mean trouble for you, and it could mean death for somebody else in a four-wheeler. So you don't want to be in that situation, because at the end of the day, if there's a major accident and if there's a death involved and you're involved in the accident, they're going to be looking at you. They're not going to be looking at your dispatcher. It's going to be on you. So protect yourself, protect others, follow the weather patterns closely, make sure they're not going to interfere with your travel, and if you think they are, do the safe thing first. Don't risk it and try to run through it, because a lot of times you just can't beat the storm, and then you're stuck, and then you are in trouble, and it's too late to do anything about it. If you find yourself in a big crosswind that's typical out on Wyoming and I-80 and you're light, find a safe place to stop, get into a truck stop if you can, and get between two other trailers. And that's the best way to protect yourself from blowing over in a windstorm out there. Hunker down between two other guys in the truck stop. And I don't mean flatbeds, I mean dry vans. Even excess heat, if you're running along, say I-10 through Arizona or something like that, excess heat, outside air temperature, can be very hard on the truck. It literally melts the rubber right off the tires. The motor has a tendency to overheat. The fan clutch works overtime. And if you're pushing it at all, the engine temperature will skyrocket. That's not good for the motor. So if it's going to be 110 or 115 in the shade, you might want to sit for the afternoon and then run in the evening hours when it's a little cooler. Be a lot easier on the truck. One of the worst drives I ever had was on I-40 through Amarillo, and I was heading east, and I'd gone in and I'd hunkered down in the Petro in Amarillo for the night, and I got up in the morning, and it was snow blowing across the highway and strong winds. And once I got out of Amarillo, the winds had iced up the snow on the road and just turned it into a skating rink. And Texas relies on God to melt the ice rather than snow plows. And it was a hairy drive. It was tough just to get off the highway safely. And that's one of the worst drives I ever had, just down where they had snow and ice, where the state didn't particularly have the equipment to handle it. And that's typical of Texas, for instance. I used to run a weather scanner, in fact, but Michigan State Troopers took it away from me. They spotted the antenna on my mirror bracket, hauled me around side, and took my weather scanner, because their argument was, well, if it can scan for weather, it can scan for police channels as well, and that's illegal. So I lost a weather scanner to Michigan, but you can still buy CB radios with built-in weather scanners in them. Cobra 29 has a weather scanner CB, and you know, maybe that's a good way to go, because you can get weather channels on those things. I thought I'd tell you a story about what happened to me one time. I'd spent the weekend in Fort McMurray, Alberta. We were hauling fuel in and out of there, me and another fellow that worked for the same company, and the temperature had dropped, and it was bitter cold through the weekend when we were in the hotel, and we had to go load Monday morning. And I left my truck running for the weekend. High idled the truck and left it running and kept an eye on it, just because I was afraid it wouldn't go Monday morning when it was time to go to work. And the old fellow that was running opposite me, his name was Ed Innes. He was a good old guy, but he'd shut his truck off for the weekend because his truck was really pretty good. It was an old Mack, and they were pretty reliable to start. So we went out Monday morning, and mine was already running. But Ed asked me if I'd crank his over while he sprayed the ether to it. Ether's a dangerous thing, and it was bitter cold. The truck didn't want to go, and I guess Ed held the button too long. All of a sudden, bang! That was the end of the motor, and that was the end of Ed Innes doing his runs for that week, because he took the motor right out of it using too much ether. Moral of the story, be prepared for the weather. Don't let it cost you a motor like it cost Ed. Stay safe. Stay aware of the weather around you. Keep the rubber side down, and I'll see you on the back haul.